Time is now, I think it's 3 o'clock, a little after 3. I'd like to call the Community Development Committee to order. And it's customary, let's bow our head in silence. And I remember people in Ukraine who's having so many problems, who's losing a lot of lives over there. Let's remember them in our prayers. Thank you. We're moving right along. Public participation. We have anyone here who would like to speak in this public participation at this time? Anyone from the public?
Sir, can you speak into the microphone?
Over here.
And it.
Name and address.
My name is Robert Lewis. I'm with the Rogers Lewis Law Firm. I'm here to answer any questions about the abandoned building certification resolution that we're seeking for 11.5 St. Philip Street. I don't know if this is the proper time to speak or not, but I just want to let you know I'm here if there are any questions when that comes up.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I get approval for the January 20th, 2022 minutes. Councilman Gregory, we at the minutes. If I get approval. Did I get a second from someone?
I'll second.
Okay. It's moving second. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. And I was asked to be moved item D, which is old business, up to the top of the agenda. I have a motion for that, please.
So move. I'll second.
It was moved and second that we move item D, which is under old business, to the first item on the agenda. All in favor by vote by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. So we are going with the ADU, which is to address that. Who's going to present this?
Hello. So this amended ordinance before you clarifies the affordability requirement on accessory dwelling units. As a quick refresher, currently there are affordability restrictions that require any ADU that is rented out to a household to be limited to those at or below 80% of the area median income. There's no end date for when that affordability requirement would expire, which effectively means that it is restricted as affordable in perpetuity. Based off of prior discussion, we heard an interest in essentially providing 2 avenues to do an accessory dwelling unit in Charleston. So this amended ordinance provides those 2 paths. One is if the city provides a subsidy to support the development of the ADU, then there would be a requirement that the ADU be affordable for a period of at least 30 years. And then 2, if there is not a subsidy, then the affordability requirements would not apply. So that is essentially what the ordinance does, provides those 2 paths. And a couple other quick items to note. Since our last meeting, we did some additional research to see if we could learn more about what income brackets are being served by ADUs rented out around the country. And there's been limited research done on this topic, but we did find studies completed in the Pacific Northwest and in areas throughout California. One study from UC Berkeley found that ADUs in Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver showed that 58% of homeowners reported renting to households below the market rate. A study from the Sacramento Area Council of Governments found that a majority of ADUs were rented to low and moderate income households, with roughly 20% rented to those at the extremely low and very low income categories. And then another study from the Southern California Association of Governments showed similar results to Sacramento's. In addition, I'll remind everyone that Housing and Community Development has been preparing to launch a pilot program to support the development of affordable ADUs in Charleston. And we have reserved $200,000 to support approximately 10 households with their construction. And the affordability requirements in this ordinance would apply to those developments and any others in the future that receive a financial subsidy. So again, this ordinance simply requires the affordability requirement on those ADUs receiving financial subsidy from the city. If you don't receive financial subsidy, then there is not the affordability requirement.
Councilman Gregory?
I think I understand the distinction, okay? If I heard you correctly. If you decide, okay, no subsidy, but you want to make them affordable, is that a category? In other words, I'm not coming to the city for any assistance or anything, okay? And I'm gonna build mine, but I want it to be affordable. Did you say that that would be affordable in perpetuity if I did that?
No. So if you receive the financial subsidy, then there's the affordability restriction. And it has to be affordable to households at 80% or below for at least 30 years. That's if you receive the financial subsidy. If you do not receive financial subsidy, there is no affordability requirements. You could choose to rent it at an affordable rate. And as it's very possible that many households will decide to do that, but you're not required to do that.
Okay. And why is 30 such a good number instead of 40 or 50?
30 is typically what we have done for most affordable housing developments in the city.
Understandable.
So that's kind of the standard. So that's we think is a reasonable time period for a homeowner who is, putting their own capital into the project to not have that be extended, for a much longer period of time.
Mm.
And it aligns with traditional mortgages. So it's a good
30-year mortgages. I still like 40 or 50 years. And if it doesn't work, then you reduce it. For me, that's just, I'm not even offering an amendment. I'm just putting it out there for discussion.
Let me ask a quick question. Okay, even with the ADU, if someone want to build the ADU and come and build it so far, so we have a stipulation that not for STR.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the
Short-term
ordinance
rental.
already stipulates that.
Okay, that's I wanted to make sure of that.
Yeah, so this amendment just deals with the affordability requirements.
And let's just go back to the 30-40, okay? And correct me if I'm wrong. I also thought that the reason why we did 30 in most cases is because the owners wouldn't be that attractive to the developers, okay? I thought that was one of the reasons why we stick with 30, not just for the ADUs, but in general. And I think that we always wanted to be forever. And if this is an opportunity, I don't see why we can't put 40 if 40 doesn't work, because we are getting applicants already, right?
We've had a great deal of interest in the ADUs. The challenge that we encountered and that folks were hesitant on is first that the ordinance initially referred to us having the ADUs in place for perpetuity. Many residents that called and interested parties that called did not want to do perpetuity. In some instances, we mentioned that it could be 40 years. That raised a few eyebrows and some hard breathing and hesitancy on the part of those that were interested. We can certainly try it, but what we've heard and seen from those who've made inquiries and called is that seems longer than what would traditionally or to typically be in place. And so that's why we try to find, if you will, common ground relative to the 30 years and because it was closely associated with what homeowners typically see in a mortgage that they have on their primary residence.
Well, why don't we use the 40-year in such a way that, and I don't know if we can manipulate the funding in such a way that if somebody goes 40, 50, then perhaps the level of subsidy for that particular unit may be a little higher than someone that's going to 30. In other words, incentivize it.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. We would need to go back to the drawing board on that, simply because we don't have the flexibility unless council finds us some more money. Right now, we're trying to do it within a said budget, but that's certainly something that we could look at. And one of the other things I'll mention to the council members is we were doing this from our fee in lieu dollars, simply because those are not our federal dollars. If we spend federal dollars on any level of construction, there are other processes and requirements that would be related that would certainly delay the construction of these. And so that's why we wanted to utilize our unrestricted funding. But that funding is, we don't have a lot of wiggle room there, and we will bring to you at the next meeting of the City Committee of City Council an understanding of how we have allocated those dollars. And right now, we don't have a great deal of extra, if you will, in that budget.
Well, I mean, in generally speaking, though, I mean, we're going to have to find money for your department because your budget is slowly becoming depleted, even with the fee in lieu of, I mean, even with the federal subsidy and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's getting to the point, if we don't identify additional resources for
Yes,
you
sir.
to be able to leverage as you do, okay? It's going to be all for naught. We've got to find additional resources, Mr. Chairman and other council members, for this function. I mean, a function that over the years have been able to leverage their limited dollars into almost $500 million of development. So I think this is very, very important for this body, especially the community development, to start thinking about bonding issues, however we can, to try to keep building and partnering for affordable housing. Otherwise, I think that our housing division will only be overseeing existing, and there'll be very little new stuff that we're going to be able to do. And I know we're remotely, folks, but this is a very, very serious issue to me, especially as we face this affordable crisis. We've got to find some more resources for this department, not division, this department.
Thank you for that, Councilman. I think we need to look at that very seriously and looking at more money to put into the community development office. And I think this was a long time coming. We should have been doing this a long time ago, because we know this was going to happen sooner or later when things come down. So we need to look back at that seriously and putting more money into the community development office if we are serious about affordable housing. I think Councilman Pell has his hands up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to say I support this ordinance as amended. I think that this, we had a very interesting debate about ADUs and affordability restrictions. I think it was the last time we met. And Councilman Gregory has a perspective. I have a perspective on it. If you're interested in that, you can go to YouTube and listen to it. I'm not going to regurgitate it, but the current ordinance reflects both of our perspectives. And I think that that's great. We can try both approaches. We can try the more free market approach, as you may want to refer to it. And you can also, we can also try the affordability restrictions, city, partnership, public-private partnership approach. And, hopefully they both work in their own ways. And the net effect is we have more housing units that are available on the peninsula and elsewhere in the city that will have the net effect of driving down prices and allowing more and more regular people to afford living in the city of Charleston. And I think that's what this ordinance does. ADUs are not going to solve all of our affordability problems. It's not a one size fits all deal, but this is something that can make a difference and move the needle in the right direction. So I think this is a great ordinance as amended. I've met with people in the development community that are ready to start businesses building ADUs for people around the city. The affordability restriction was an impediment. I think that when we release that, we are going to see not only more of these units being built, but actually businesses being created in the city of Charleston, building ADUs, managing ADUs, marketing ADU, the whole thing. I mean, we're helping to facilitate an entire new division of the development industry here in Charleston. So this is very exciting. I think it's a great compromise, and I appreciate all the good work of my colleagues on the committee getting us to where we are today, and of course our CD department and our planning and zoning department as well. So I look forward to voting for this today. Thanks.
Okay, I just want to make sure, even with the ADU, that we're going to really focus on affordability. And that's one of the things that we were trying to do with affordability with people living in this peninsula, living in the city of Charleston. That's one of the biggest challenges that we have. We've been talking about affordability for people to stay in this peninsula, that's working in this peninsula and don't have to drive in and coming from elsewhere. So the affordability piece is a very serious matter. It's very important to me about affordability. So I hope that we look at this very seriously, even with this ordinance that we are about to approve, if we approve it today. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Saccharin has his hand up.
Councilman Saccharin, and after that, we go back to Councilman Gregory.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm certainly supportive of this. I think the dual track is the right way to go. The question I have, maybe this is putting the horse before the cart, but have we talked to county council or anyone over at the tax assessor's office about, I think Councilman Waring mentioned this last time, will these ADUs be taxed at the 6% or 4%? And trying to get it to the 4% would be obviously more beneficial for that homeowner. Just a thought. Not sure if we had that question or crossed that bridge yet.
I'm going to ask Ms. Johnson if she would answer that, but I think it's going to be 6%. I'm not sure.
Yes, sir. And we have not checked with the assessor's office, Councilmember Saccharin, but because it's an income producing, if it's an income producing unit, typically it would be assessed at the higher tax rate, but we can certainly find that answer for you before council of next week.
Thank you, Gianna.
Councilman Gregory, then we'll move on to something.
I do think this is a unique ordinance because it has built-in competition. And it will be interesting to see whether or not we get more with the incentive versus the market rate. So for me, I think that this is a very, very interesting experiment. And if we see that more people are interested in the subsidy, again, that goes back to what we talked about earlier. We're going to need more money to really continue things to be affordable. Mr. Chairman, I move for approval.
I'll second.
Okay, it was approved and second that we move on with the ADUs as outlined with the ordinance that's before us. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
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 Opposers, nay, ayes have it. So we move on. We're going to the second part of the agenda. We move now to new businesses. The first on the new business is an update on the homelessness and the strategy. It's going to electronic presentation. Who's using this?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. So my name's Emily Beck. I'm the Community Liaison and Homelessness Coordinator for the City of Charleston. Gianna has just asked that I share a little bit about the Mayor's Commission on Homelessness and Affordable Housing and some other homelessness initiatives that are going on in Charleston. So we can go ahead and get started. Can I have the next slide? Oh, up here? All right. So the Mayor's Commission on Homelessness and Affordable Housing was formed in 2016 by the mayors of City of Charleston, Somerville, Mount Pleasant, and North Charleston. And it's made up of passionate community members as an advocacy group to assist those who are unhoused or at risk of becoming unhoused. So underneath the Mayor's Commission, there's 4 different subcommittees: the Executive Committee, Housing Subcommittee, Integrated Services, and Resource. They each have different initiatives that they're going to be working on this year. The Executive Committee is going to explore ways to do local advocacy. The Housing Subcommittee is working on putting on a landlord engagement event to take place this summer and a developer engagement event to take place in the winter. And that's to get stakeholders on board with affordable housing and try to make partnerships so they can rent to people who are receiving government subsidies. The Integrated Services Subcommittee is working on standing up a nonprofit, a Charleston branch of a national nonprofit called Family Promise, that will allow community members to mentor those who are at risk of becoming homeless. And finally, the Resources Subcommittee is working on fundraising for the Hope Center. So in addition to the Mayor's Commission, then there's several other things that the city is involved with to advocate for the homeless and at risk of becoming homeless. We put on several different meetings. The first one is the current state of homelessness that brings together a bunch of providers to tell about the organizations and share updates about what resources are available. We have an internal city meeting that brings together parks and police to talk about areas of concern. And then, of course, we do warming center support around the winter time. Some of the other meetings that we have on here are led by other community members, different providers that we're a part of, and the city supports them in any way that we can. The West Ashley Team Combating Homelessness. We work with Homeless Court, Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, extending branches in the Safety Net Assistance Network. So we have a lot of good things in the works. There's a lot of people who are working on this initiative and excited about helping the homeless in Charleston. Just a matter of bringing them together to collaborate and make sure everybody's on the same page and work as efficiently as possible. So the next thing that I was going to do was introduce our outreach worker, Talia Rice. She wasn't able to be here today, but I think that she's going to tell a little bit about her outreach work in a future meeting. Yes, sir.
Who are the members of this commission?
Of the Mayor's Commission?
Yes, and who are the members and what are their positions?
Yeah, so the chair of the Mayor's Commission is Robert Clement, and then Jack Little is the vice chair. Some of the other members, we have leaders of the faith community like Jen Cameron and Pastor Eric at St. Matthew's. Reverend Kylon Middleton is a part of the Mayor's Commission. Sorry.
Who's the treasurer?
The treasurer?
Yes.
There's not a treasurer of the Mayor's Commission, no.
Who runs the money? The chairman?
So the commission itself, council member, does not manage funding. We work with Palmetto Project to oversee the funding, which is the organization that Steve Scarden heads up. So the members of the commission are appointed by the mayors from the various jurisdictions. So Mayor Summey, Mayor Haney, Mayor Waring from Somerville, each of them appoint 6 members to the commission. If you all may recall, some of y'all are too young to remember maybe the first mayor's commission that was comprised simply of the city of Charleston. And so we had a number of nonprofit organizations represented therein. The Mayor's Commission now, because homelessness or having unsheltered residents is not likened simply to the city of Charleston, we expanded it, included membership from across our community, so that as we look at best practices and as we strategize, we hopefully garner greater leverage and greater opportunity to help solve the issues that are before us. So it is simply a commission. It does not have a treasurer or a secretary other than those who have agreed to act in that capacity. The funding that has been raised through the Homeless to Hope Fund has been managed the last 3 years by Steve Scarden's organization, the Palmetto Project.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Saccharin has his hand up.
Councilman Saccharin.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question about the group and kind of how they work with local nonprofits. So I didn't get the whole list of members, but is there anyone from 180 Place on there, number one, and so that's my first question, and is what is our relationship with 180 Place?
So 180 is not a member because again, these members are comprised of individuals from the community and not necessarily organizations. We partner with 180 in a number of instances. In fact, you all approve in the Community Development Block Grant budget annually funding that supports the operations of 180 Place. And so we are continuing to partner with them as it relates to that funding. And they are literally the one of two organizations in the city of Charleston that provides housing or shelter for the homeless. Even though it's temporary, they're one of the few that does that. So 180 is still there, but as it relates to the Mayor's Commission, it is not necessarily represented by organizations, but individuals who are interested in advocating and helping to solve the challenge of homelessness.
So just a follow-up question. So I guess, I just find it a little bit, I just will say it, Robert Clement is the chair of this commission?
That's correct.
But the director for 180 Place is not on the commission.
That's correct. There aren't any organizational representatives on the commission.
Okay.
And so what I wanted to share.
Can I follow up
I'm sorry.
with
Yes.
you? Just in terms of our involvement with 180,
Sure.
we did give them $3 million, if I'm not mistaken, to construct what they're constructing now.
In fact, council member, there is $6 million
Okay.
going to 180 Place for the construction of 573 Meeting Street. 3 million of those dollars are coming from our bond funds that was approved several years ago. And then 3 million came from the LDC settlement funds. And so investment consistently goes to that organization. Additionally, I believe the community assistance funds, when they were once utilized for nonprofits, was also invested there. So the city of Charleston continues to support that organization.
Did that answer your question, Councilman?
Yep, thank you.
Their continuum of care as well, aren't they?
Correct. The continuum, their staff helps to manage the continuum of care. And that's a perfect segue. Talia couldn't be with us today, but you all authorized in the budget for this year, us bringing in another outreach worker. Initially, Talia's role was to help address some of the challenges that our businesses were having on King Street to help minimize the police being called and for us to build a rapport with those persons that are unsheltered in the King Street district to hopefully transition them into housing, help them access the services that are available, and then referring them to the appropriate organization. So we anticipate that we will have a second person in this role by the end of May of this year. So we're excited about that. Currently, we are continuing to work with our local partners. And soon, as you all know, we will have the Hope Center that we will house initially at the 529 Meeting Street address, which is what we originally referred to as the Navigation Center. It will be called the Hope Center. And we are working pretty diligently to get that up and running. There is a great deal that has to be done with the building itself. The nonprofit that currently resides there will be relocating out of that building. And so we are working towards having that building ready for occupation with our nonprofit partners by June 1. And so thank you all for that staff support. In addition to that, we will have an MOU presented to you all next week during the council meeting. We will enter into memorandums of understanding with all of the organizations that provide services. They will be providing services on a rotating basis at the center. So in addition to the staff from the city of Charleston, we have a number of organizations that will also help us to facilitate and provide the services to those residents that are unsheltered. And briefly, a week or two ago, you all met, I think, Latasha Jenkins Flood. Latasha, can you wave? She will lead the center. She is the center director. So in concert with staff and in concert with our community partners, we hope to provide a more robust and a more expanded level of service for those persons that are unsheltered.
Ms. Johnson, what's our time frame at the building now?
You mean as far as being able to lease? So you'll get a lease agreement soon as well. So we have been, as you all know, on a month-to-month lease. The owner has agreed to continue to allow us to lease at least for another year. When I spoke to them a week ago, they were preparing a lease to submit to our corporation council. They are interested naturally long-term. They want to, as I think I shared with you all previously, develop that building. They also own the Copleston Cleaners building, which is right next door, but they're not quite ready to jump yet. And so they are allowing us some additional time to locate there until we can build a new center. And so one other bit of information I want to share, much of what we are doing, other than the Mayor's Commission, because they've existed for some time, we began working on what we call a come home plan back in 2013. Many cities and local governments started preparing what we call a 10-year strategy to end homelessness. So literally everything that we're doing and working on is derived from that plan. We're in the midst of amending that plan currently and are working with a HUD technical assistance provider in order to do that. And one of the things that we're focusing on heavily is looking at the numbers, that can stay down there, looking at the numbers in relation to homelessness and what the needs are. And so just for a moment, I'll share with you, I don't know if it's on the screen or not. Not moving. Okay. So one of the things that we're working with the HUD TA provider, they recognize that unfortunately, South Carolina is one of the lower resourced communities when it comes to providing services for our unsheltered neighbors. And so we have been working over the last maybe 8 to 9 months with, again, a number of service providers, our HUD TA representative, to come up with some fine-tuned or numbers that look at not only the need, but the resources that are needed in order to facilitate this. And so under our tenant-based rental assistance for Charleston County, right now we've identified the need for 2,238 units that are needed for our homeless residents. Oh, thank you all so much. I didn't know that was up there. So if you see Charleston, that represents Charleston County versus Charleston City. And we are kind of fine tuning these numbers with our partners and with our HUD TA providers. And so what that literally shows is the level of assistance that is needed to produce the number of units or to pay for the number of units that are needed in our community. And so one of the things I'll point out, naturally, the pandemic exacerbated the need for housing in our community, especially for our populations that are 30% and below the area median income. And so this represents, I think, Councilmember Gregory, you mentioned the continuum. These areas are part of what we call the continuum of care area. They have a 7-county area that they address. So these are the initial number of units that are needed to help to address the number of units that are needed for our homeless neighbors. And I know it's pretty stark, but yes, sir.
The 9 million, thank you. The 9 million figure, let's call it 10 million figure, and the 2,200 units. What does that come to per unit? Something like?
Oh, I haven't done the math on that, council member, because I know those numbers will change a little. Matt, have you done that math?
But I mean, is that not the 10 million will do what? It's going to help pay rent and supplement?
Correct. It'll help pay rent for those 2,200 units that are needed. That's correct. Yes. And so what we'll continue to do is make sure you're aware of all the efforts that we're undertaking under our homelessness initiatives. It is an issue in our community, as you all know. More and more, we have seen the tent cities that have arisen. And so Talia and the young lady that is coming on with the city have been very active in trying to build those partnerships, build a level of trust with those folks that are out there in the streets, again, with the goal being to help them access the services that are available and then hopefully get them into actual housing. And so that's been our goal, and we're going to continue to work in that vein. Thank you.
Microphone, please. Thank you.
The 2213 need is included in the overall need of affordable housing for the city of Charleston, which is around 16,000, I think it is.
I'm sure, because some of what our comprehensive plan addressed, and Chloe's looking at numbers, was the need for those persons that were below the 30% threshold. And our comprehensive plan also shared with us that we had a gap, as it is right now, of like 7,000 units. So, yes, sir. Thank you all.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to item number 2, which is our review of the affordable housing dashboard. That's another electronic presentation.
So thank you. We're very proud today to share with you the city's new affordable housing dashboard. So as you know, our city plan recently found a need for an additional 16,000 affordable units to address affordability gaps by the year 2030. Now, that's a big, big number for Charleston. And so if we're going to meet that number, to meet that goal, we need tools in place to help us understand how we're succeeding or how we're failing. And so the affordable housing dashboard is one of those tools that will allow us to track our progress and to better analyze and understand affordable housing in our city. And just a little bit of background, this project is 2 years in the making with a lot of hard work from folks like Chloe Stuber, Sandy Gagne, Tracy McKee, Marla Jackman, Florence Peters, Gianna, working together to compile a lot of information, build up the back-end processes to allow us to be able to have this functional tool and be able to better track affordable housing going forward. And also we built this tool with some key stakeholders in mind, really our public, our development community, our staff, and our decision makers. Our overarching goals with this affordable housing dashboard are to increase transparency around affordable housing in our city, to provide education, both at a macro level and at a project level, and to give you all the information that you need in order to make the decisions to help us address this important issue. So here is the affordable housing dashboard. We've captured some screenshots for this presentation. Sandy's on the Zoom in case we want to bring it up and play around with it. But basically, what you can see here is an affordable housing dashboard that documents all of the existing affordable housing in our city, all of the proposed projects that are in our pipeline, and shows what the remaining gap is that we need to meet. And just quickly, we can see our map on the left column. We have the list of all the proposed projects that are currently active in the city, going through permitting, going through planning. We have at the bottom are some tables that really aggregate that information, looking at when the affordable housing is expected to be completed, breaking it down by income level, breaking it down by geographic area, breaking it down in terms of the AMI levels and other sets of data. So we're also able to really look at, and hopefully this is a tool that is easy to use for users. You can search using our search bar. You can click on any of these individual projects in the map. You can click on any of the projects on the left, and it's going to pop up with information about that specific project. So I'm going to hand it off to Chloe now to finish this off.
What did I do? Okay, so in the pop-up boxes, when you click on a unit on the map or on the list on the left, if it's an existing unit, we're not divulging a lot of information. The idea is people are living in that now, so we don't want to give out too much information, but it does tell you if it's multifamily or single family, the amount of units in that building, and whether it's a rental or for sale product. For the proposed units, proposed are those that are currently going through a permitting and plan review process. It'll tell you the address, the number of expected units, which is subject to change because these are in flux, remember, and so some of these details may change as the project moves through the approvals process. Again, it'll say rental or for sale product, multifamily, single family. It will give the affordability period. So if it's in perpetuity, it'll say yes, or it'll provide the years of affordability period if it's not in perpetuity. This one's not showing that. You can see that the scroll bar on the right has room to go. So there's more information there. If it's a LIHTC project, if the city has provided land, funding sources that are going into it, and how much from each of those funding sources. And then finally, committed, when we have planned unit developments that have committed a certain percentage of their units to be affordable housing, we've also captured that in this dashboard. But because those timelines are so uncertain and we don't know what that final build out count will be for the units, total residential units and planned unit developments, typically all we've listed here is the name of the PUD and the percentage of affordable units that they've committed to. And this data is coming from our permitting and plan software. So I wanted to share a couple of other perks of having this data and how we're tracking it. So we are capturing all development that has any number of affordable units in it as it comes through our approvals process. They have to fill out, developers have to fill out a registration form. Even if they have just one unit of affordable housing, we then enter that into our permitting and plan software. Not only does it populate the affordable housing dashboard map that the public can access, but it also allows staff to track the progress of the project as it moves through the approvals process. And it's essentially provides a stamp saying that this is a priority project. This is helping us to streamline the approvals process and make sure that we are giving that much needed priority to affordable housing. And this is a close-up shot of the pie chart that is on the affordable housing dashboard. This is in the bottom right-hand corner here. So this is just a close-up of that. This is showing that pie slice that we're trying to get down. So the yellow piece, we're trying to get that as low as possible. That's the gap that we're trying to meet. These numbers will automatically update based on what's coming from our permitting and plan software. And as projects are completed and move into our existing affordable housing database. This number, there's data that is part that made up this pie chart that is based on market values of housing that's not necessarily restricted as affordable. So that's just something to keep in mind. This is also reflecting the amount of housing that we had in the city at the end of 2021 that was naturally affordable, which may have changed by now, but this is a helpful sort of ballpark scenario for us to work with. We have a short link for the dashboard, which is charleston-sc.gov/housing-dashboard. You can also find it from our city's GIS webpage, on the main page of the Housing and Community Development website. And for those of you who are looking at this now, you can take a picture of that QR code and it'll take you to the dashboard. Keep in mind though that it really does work best on desktop. So it's not as fun of an experience to navigate if you're looking at it on your cell phone. So, but that is, you can capture that short link there and type it on your desktop.
Yes, go ahead.
Do you track the number of units that are coming off the roll that are currently affordable because the tax credits are running out? And do you factor that into your final number?
Yes.
Okay. The next question is, you did a study for the North Charleston. Did you work with North Charleston on their zoning? Was it you, Chloe?
As a graduate student, yes.
Okay. And it's my understanding that the piece that you developed, okay, for the city of North Charleston in terms of looking at their zoning rules and how those zoning rules may or may not restrict affordability in certain areas. And I've been wanting to get to you for some time now, because you and I talked initially about it. But to me, if you did that as a graduate student for the city of North Charleston, and Councilman Pell, we've been talking about zoning issues and looking at all of our zoning laws and all that stuff for a while, which could take some time. But it would be great if our planning department, based upon your expertise, sort of do something similar for the city of Charleston in terms of existing zoning laws that might hamper the development of affordable housing. Am I going in the right direction, Councilmember Appel?
I couldn't have said it better. This is beautiful to hear. I love it.
Just wanted to let you know we have the expertise in-house to do it. And I think that we should really utilize that as opposed to waiting for a year or 2-year study of all of our zoning laws. I think that if we can get a head start on that now and start making recommendations for changing those laws to make sure that affordability is achievable, I think that we should do that now. The other question that I had, can you overlay the equity mapping system, okay, on your dashboard, particularly the mapping that you show in terms of where affordable housing are, et cetera, et cetera. It would be great to see whether or not we can overlay the equity mapping that was done by you. I think you were one of the people that helped with that, along with Melody and Amber, to sort of make great use of that, especially when we start talking about affordable housing. It would give us some sense of where problems were and whether or not there are existing covenants or zoning restrictions that continue to, in some cases, have a discriminatory impact as well as restrict affordability.
Those are great ideas. Thank you.
Okay. And I'll, if need be, we'll talk to the head of the planning department to see whether or not we can get a head start, okay, on what we call crucial. And if it's crucial and we have the expertise to sort of just give us a little head start, I think we should be utilizing you accordingly.
Thank you, Councilman. I think I'll let you all handle that part of it. Anything else? Anything else? Oh, does anyone have any questions? Councilman Ware?
Can you all tell me what program we have that incentivizes the private sector? I understand the nonprofit community, you know, humanities of the world, but when a private sector developer comes in and because of whatever incentives we put together says, I'd like to build some affordable units. I mean, it's not going after tax credits and things like that. Do we have a program that does it?
I mean, it's limited in terms of the funding that we have available to provide support to those sort of developments, right? And through our, some of our zoning, we are able to incentivize some of those affordable units to be included, or they pay the fee in lieu, right? But I think we need to look at what are some of the other options that are out there to incentivize those affordable housing developers, nonprofit or private, to actually construct without LIHTC, right? And so that's looking at things like tax abatement, other sorts of incentives that are out there to bring them in as partners. And right now there are challenges because, and as you see on the dashboard, most of these affordable housing developments are, through the LIHTC program, supported through, our bond funding or our fee in lieu funding. That's sort of been the structure that we have to get new, larger density affordable housing in the city. So there are other tools out there that we can explore.
Mr. Gregory, turn the mic on, please.
Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, we did have a hotel task force, okay? And a part of developing that ordinance, we have placed on hotels, okay, based upon square footage, whatever the formula is, that they give you guys fee in lieu of. Just going back to the council member's question. But to me, and I've been saying this ever since I've been sitting in this seat, that we need a housing linkage for all developments. All developments. I don't know whether or not we can do it legally. I don't know, but I've been talking about this for a while because there are some cities in this country that has a housing linkage to every development that they build. I think DC is one of them, okay? That could really fill the coffers pretty quick and help us get to the $16,000 and something dollars. Now, this is something that I've been talking about, and it's really relevant to the question that Councilman Waring just posed. How do we get the private developments in this city, especially those where their employers are going to need affordable housing? Okay, so somehow I think we have to research that. I don't know whether or not legislatively, state legislature will restrict us in any way. I don't know, but I don't think so. Okay, I mean, this is one way to get around it, and it may not be popular, but if we're serious and we're intentional about building affordable units, we should be identifying every resource that is possible and bring it before this body so that we can then determine whether or not we want to go forward with it.
We'd be glad to.
I'd love to see that. I've been wanting that for years. I think it could help us a lot.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
Councilmember Saccharin has his hand up as well.
Councilman Saccharin?
Thank you, Chair. I had the opportunity this morning. I'm not sure if Erica Harrison is there. If you are, thank you for the tour this morning. I went and visited 8586 Line Street, which is basically a 30-unit micro unit apartments. They're roughly 350, 375 square feet. Trying to get a sense of, the project that we are going to eventually talk about putting out by Jeff. What's his last name? I can't remember his last name.
Roberts.
Jeff Roberts, yes. So I wanted to go over there to kind of take a look at that project. But anyways, part of that conversation was specifically what we're talking about today in terms of increased flexibility. So if I'm a developer and I come into a neighborhood or a building, is there an opportunity for us to increase STR potential? And maybe a few of those units are STR, which would help offset some of the costs, and then also require a affordable requirement on the unit to make it beneficial or make it financially feasible for the developer to build that. So it was just some conversation we had this morning. I believe the mayor had a similar conversation. I just wanted to throw that out there maybe for a future CD committee meeting. When we start thinking about creative ways to get things done, that could potentially help the developer get that project built financially and include some affordable housing units in that project.
In piece, I mean, it's unbelievable the recommendations that are in there, which I think has replaced our sort of fair housing plan, really. It's really a great piece, and some of the suggestions in there, I just think it's time for us to start following through on it. I mean, I know that we're trying to deal with stuff with the inclusionary zoning and all that kind of stuff, and we've got people trying to work on that. But I just think that beyond that, there are some unbelievable suggestions in the Fair Charleston plan that we need to start looking at as it relates to affordability.
I think what we can do, another discussion, and we can bring that back here for another discussion, and we can go through it, you know, so we have more time to go through it, and just bring it back into.
Yes, sir. And we have done that. It's been about 1.5 years since we brought you all an update because we are close to being, having completed what was suggested and recommended there. And what we will do when we bring you back the budget relative to the fee in lieu and the projects that the fee in lieu are funding, we can also bring forth our recommendations relative to other funding sources. I just wanted to add to council member or respond to council member Waring's question. We do have PUD amendments where 10% of those provide affordable housing. We do not provide any funding for those. That's a part of the additional density that they receive within that PUD. So typically the one incentive that we have that we've been able to use is the fact that when you allow a certain level of density, we can sometimes get a return of units from that. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the things I've been thinking about, you know, we created this zoning change where minimum lot sizes doesn't have to comply to the 50-foot frontage, which allows more lots to be created, in particular in infill project. And I just don't think, when I speak to some of the engineering firms, they're not even familiar with it. I mean, design engineering firms, they're not even familiar that we made that change. And if somebody were to say, if a private landowner were to say, I support affordable housing, in particular affordable owner occupied housing, and wants to, instead of have 50-foot frontage lots, I want to have 40-foot frontage lots so they can get more slices of the pie, so to speak. And they came to the city, how could the city financially help with that? The city has a wonderful piece with, you know, for affordability, if it's deed restricted for what, 90 years or 99 years, which I think is awesome. But I think putting together some of the pieces we have with some of the zoning change that we've created, I don't know that we have a package that says, if you do this, we'll do that to the private sector. I think we have packages, in particular when it comes to tax credit housing, and you know, you get to 4% and the, what, 6%. And and I'm not knocking that, we need all of that. But until we get something that makes sense for the private sector to engage, government just can't do it all by themselves. And nonprofits can't do it all by themselves. But I think if we get the private sector out there saying, if I get more units, I can hit the economy of scales. And if I get the some help offsetting the cost, then I don't mind deed restricting it, you know, for the 90-year period or whatever period. Right now, what we do is we use all our efforts to find properties to buy, and then we try to put the deal together. As we know, land costs is going up so much until, you know, we just got to find a way to throw some incentives for the private sector person to say, well, if I develop it this way, I'm gonna get 4 lots. If I develop it that way, I'm gonna get 6 lots.
And we agree, council member. And we've done some of that. And I think Jeff Roberts could probably speak to that better than any of us can. But again, one of the incentives, and you mentioned incentives, we have found even with our private sector organization, we do need a level of capital in order to incentivize that as well. An excellent suggestion. But again, it does come back to capital, the zoning, and some of the other incentives. As a matter of fact, we're refining our packages or our list of tools right now. Capital is still a part of that list. But yeah, good suggestion. We're looking at that right now.
Could we have a workshop or something for developers? I mean, because I agree, people just don't know. And I do think that, you know, we do have one of the best teachers in this room.
Yes, sir. In fact, Mr. Roberts and several developers, we had 2 roundtables last year with developers to kind of talk through some of what one of the recommendations or the questions that was posed for them is, what would you do if you were told you needed to produce 16,000 units? And so they gave us suggestions, which I'm glad to share with the City Committee of City Council and Council with regard to that. And then we also talked through other incentives that would prove helpful in the development of housing. And so we do have that literature. We did 2 last year and 1 the prior year, Developers Council, just where we got feedback from them and understood the challenges and opportunities that they saw as part of working in the city of Charleston.
Y'all got to tell y'all story.
Any other questions? We can move on. Are we on to number 3? Yes, finally.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Committee. So this is an application pursuant to the Abandoned Building Revitalization Act of 2013. The owner is 85 and 87 Wentworth LLC, and the building is at 11.5 St. Philip Street. Pursuant to this act, we need to run the application by council for a resolution certifying that it does qualify as an abandoned building. The package that was sent to you has all the materials that was included in the application, including an affidavit from the owner showing that it has been completely abandoned and unused by the public for the past 5 years. So we would ask that this application be approved.
Move for approval.
Second.
It was moved. Do you have any questions from anyone else? No. We have a motion. Looking for a second? Okay, it was moved in second. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
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 Opposes? Ayes have it.
Your microphone's off, Mr. Chair.
Oh, number 4 now, request for additional TIP funding, the low line project.
Yes, sir. Approximately 2 years ago, council members, you all approved funding for the low line affordable housing project. At the time when we presented the low line affordable housing ground lease agreement, the developer did not need the full amount of the 1.5 million that we had allocated to the project. We were surprised, but unfortunately, and it is outlined in your package, because of the number of issues that are going on globally with supply chain, increased cost of construction, the developer has now come back and asked if the $500,000 that was previously approved that we did not award could be allocated towards this project. And so, commiserate with what we've done previously, we wanted to bring it to you all first, and then it will also go to the Ways and Means Committee of City Council. So they are, for a reminder for you, producing 55 units of rental housing, literally from 30% of the area median income up to 80% of the area median income. And so they're doing a spectrum of housing within the development, making excellent progress, have worked very well with outreach to the community, and they are requesting $500,000 from that original allocation. We did confirm with finance, with Matt Froelich, our deputy CFO, that funding was still remained, and it is. So we ask your approval of that.
Just a quick question for you.
Sure.
As I read through the documents, there's a 50 versus 58%. And if they were to get to the 50% versus the 58%, it would make the cost cheaper. Somewhere in there, I read something about 50% allows them to do X, Y, Z. But if you don't, if you're above 50%, you have to do, I don't have mine with me, because I think they were at 58%.
Yes, sir.
And I think that there's some request in there. I'm just trying to find out whether or not doing what we're doing is going to affect the 58 versus the 50. Because if they get down to 50, some cost change for them.
Council member, I don't know if you're referring to their developer fee.
Yeah,
Because there is a requirement by state housing that they have a certain amount of developer fee in their project. And if they go below that, then they risk not getting credits. State housing requires that they be able to have that developer fee included in their budget at a certain level. And that may be what you're referring to, and the pages are not numbered. But I think that spoke to deferring approximately 50%, 58% of their fee versus 50% of their fee.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
okay. And if they get to 50, what does that mean? I got a little confused.
Matt, you want to speak to that?
I got a little confused about the 50 versus the 58, and what do you get if you go from 50?
Yeah,
to
it
50?
basically gets them at the level they need to be based on state housing's requirements.
At the 50?
Yes,
Because
sir.
if you're above 50,
Then it puts the project in jeopardy.
okay. And that's why I'm asking, how do we get from 58 to 50 so it won't be in jeopardy?
Right, so if we invest the additional funding for them, that allows them to get at the level they need to be.
And that's the question I wanted to ask.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
And then, so the $500,000 will help us get. Okay.
Move for approval.
Second.
It is moving second that the request for TIP funding be approved. Any other questions? All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposers, nay, ayes have it. We're moving now. Okay, we have, on number 5, we have a discussion to amend chapter 54 of the Code of City of Charleston zoning ordinance and land use regulation in the workforce housing district, opportunity zone, and regulation part 4 of off-street parking requirements, small efficiency dwelling units. So we have all that in one. All right, Chris.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. So essentially, this is an amendment that came from the private sector, and the applicant, I think, will be speaking on this, but it was before you all at City Council, of course, for a public hearing. It's already been recommended for approval by the Planning Commission, but it is a ordinance that would create a definition for small efficiency dwelling units as a way to create more housing in the city. And then it would have some regulations related to those, particularly in reference to off-street parking. And with that, I would suggest that the applicant maybe come explain to you all some of the thoughts behind the ordinance and be available for any questions, and I'll be here available as well.
Mr. Roberts?
Sir, can you speak into the mic so we can hear you on the
Yeah.
video? Thank you.
Jeff Roberts, JJR Development, Patrick Head, Erica Harrison. Also who may speak is Arthur Lawrence and Donna Jacobs from Planning Commission here as a adjunct to what we're presenting. What we had is the comprehensive plan that came out as a draft in June of 2021, which is a great document and ultimately got ratified by City Council in October of 2021, really advanced a bunch of different issues. And what we're trying to do here is create a typology of the unit, which is very successful in cities like Austin, Texas, and San Francisco, and Washington, and New York, and seamlessly fit into the comprehensive plan, which basically advances racial and economic equity, increases the permanent, affordable, and attainable housing for all income levels, strongly encourages and creates incentives for diversity of housing types within neighborhoods, and encouraging the development of housing in compatible mixed use and mixed income, market rate and subsidized units mixed together in developments in neighborhoods near grocery stores and transportation centers and everything. So basically, what we are looking to do is have the type of unit that is price approachable, because the definition of a market rate studio, those things are renting for close to $2,000, $2,100. And if we start to develop things in areas of mixed use zoning and city center, where it's walkable to jobs, walkable to groceries, and we slightly reduce the parking requirements, because those people really, most people don't need a car, but we do have allowances for sufficient parking, but they could walk across the street to work. They can take public transit. They can have bicycles. They're near a supermarket. And these units really allow somebody to walk in on a price approachable unit as probably, from a free market point of view, of 85% of AMI without a subsidy or a restriction. And this just gives, it's one solution. It is not a cure-all. We need 20 solutions. And thank you for the kind words, Ms. Director Johnson and Councilman Gregory. We just gave a nice presentation to the Planning Commission on February 16th about free market solutions and potential collaborations with the public, with the private market sector on coming up with really innovative, interesting solutions, how we can involve the private sector, because we can't subsidize our way totally out of a housing crisis. So we came up with a solution where people can get a Class A type of apartment that would qualify somewhere between 80–85% of AMI on up. This is by no means student housing. This is for a workforce missing middle. And we just think it's a tremendous idea in certain parts of the city that, again, are in urban core, in the medical district and up that Meeting Street and Morrison Drive spine. Any additions you want to add to that, Patrick and Erica?
Thanks. First of all, Erica Harrison, 18 Carolina Street, Charleston, South Carolina. I've had an opportunity to work with Jeff in the past. I've worked with other developers in the past. And one of the key components that a lot of people always constantly talk about is I want to provide affordable housing. But also at the same time, there's also this gap that occurs in what we've learned is the missing middle. And in order to provide that, you have to be able to do it it has to be able to be functional. And one thing is that this particular size and this type of development would promote a walkability, and it functions for someone who is single. Because at the end of the day, if you are making just a touch above 80% AMI, there's very little housing stock in downtown that one can afford. So it leaves you coming into the city versus being able to become a resident. And I've always consistently will say is that the ability to live in the city, and not only as a single person, makes you invested in your community. And so the more you're here, the more you're going to participate, the more you show up to these type of venues, and the more you get a true resident. And you know, the idea that this couldn't possibly function in any parts of the city is absolutely incorrect, because the mere fact that you can walk to a grocery store, the mere fact that you can walk to your work, it starts to reduce your actual footprint of where you actually travel. And we've got all those resources within less than a mile. You start to reduce what you need. And I think anything that has taught us about from this pandemic is, where do you actually need to go in the city, and what do you actually need to function? And we need to start moving away from the idea that all of our projects need to be car dependent, but rather more thinking about how we can make it more people dependent, and looking at how, when you have projects like this actually improves the infrastructure, because people are going to start talking about transportation, about our sidewalks, about all the things that are necessary to accommodate living in these type of corridors.
Can you speak into the microphone, please?
They're only for MU districts. The fee in lieu and the workforce housing requirements apply like anything else, but these are primarily on arterial roadways on Medical District and Meeting and Morrison Drive corridors, where the transit is there, where the walkability to work is there, where the walkability to shopping, and that's where this is. And those are the best things. And this type of typology is uniquely suitable for sites that are a third of an acre to a half an acre. As a matter of fact, some time ago, Director Johnson and I looked at a site that we were in the midst of acquiring on Meeting Street, because we also have properties in that district. And it's a small little strip center just north of UG Street. And I was discussing with her, and we met in a drizzly environment. And I said, wouldn't this be perfect? As Patrick and I could figure out a way to design probably 60 micro units, where a little tiny strip mall is sitting there and waiting to be further enhanced from its sad condition. So there are little pockets of places that can be done on these arterial roadways, and even larger sites like the Regis Milk Factory or the Longshoreman's property, where the developers are trying to overmass it and they're not succeeding, and these masses have to be broken up. This typology is uniquely suitable for breaking up certain masses and having different different type of typologies on the site instead of an overmassed 2 or 3 acre site. So we view it as just one tool in the toolkit that can provide a missing middle that converges in a market rate rent very close to what is a subsidized rent from Gianna's workforce housing. And for that, we don't believe that people who want to live there will always need an automobile. As a matter of fact, we think liberally from parking one car for every 3 residents as opposed to 1 car for every 4 for a workforce unit. We think that is more than generous, especially for the location. And as Erica says, the person who would live there is not auto-centric. They want to walk. If they need to go to Target, they can take an Uber for $20. But the young lady or young man who's going to live there gets to save $500 from that car payment and insurance payment and everything else. And they just don't need to center their life around it. But that's for a particular group of people in that missing middle. And 38% of the households in the city of Charleston are single. So,
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Well, thank you, Erica and the rest. Thank you. Do you have
Yeah, I have a question to Mr. Roberts. What happens if the people that do live there have cars? What does the neighborhood do? In your example, 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 would have a vehicle. What happens if you got 3 units and 3 people have cars? What does the neighborhood do?
well, respectfully, to answer that question, if we had 100 people living, if 100 people were living in one of these, there'd be 34 spots that would be required. So there is parking that is provided. So we look at the type of resident that would be in here is not automobile centric. We think that.
I understand that, Mr. Roberts. The reality is, when you rent it out, if a tenant has a car, the car has to be accommodated. I'm just trying to find an answer to that. I'm not trying to find a diversion to that.
Respectfully, we feel that the car would be accommodated because not all tenants would require a car, which is costly. They can park it on site, or they can look to locate and park the car in a garage. And we also have part of the ordinance that they're not, that a parking decal is not available to them for that neighborhood. And that would be in the lease and part of the rule that they're not eligible for a parking decal.
No, that's a good answer. That's the part I'm getting down to. So if they get to the point to where the space just isn't there for them to park, how does the lease affect their ability to remain?
Well, first of all, they're restricted in the lease from even obtaining a parking decal. They've agreed in advance that they can't be parasitically parking on a city street. And most people who are automobile centric would not necessarily want to live. The purpose of these units is it's very close to walking and shopping and not necessarily auto centric, but we're providing a fair amount of spaces there and restricting anybody from even applying for a parking decal in a lease.
See, right on Lease Street, you wasn't gonna have, you got affordable housing and you got market rate housing, and they got a terrible parking problem over there. Okay, the reality is people have cars. And what I support what you're trying to do, but to create a parking problem, we have to try to find an answer to that. And you've thought about it, probably better than most of us. I'm just trying to find out. The reality is people show up with cars because America loves cars, still in love with their cars. It'd be great if 2 out of 3 showed up with bicycles. Okay.
Well,
but the problem is when they get in there and they show up with a car, then the neighborhood suffers, and that's the part that we're trying to find an answer to.
And I've talked to a lot of neighborhoods because we develop and a lot, and Mr. Lawrence can sort of speak to that, and Ms. Jacobs as well. But a lot of the parking issues in certain particular districts have to do with people who come in there in the morning, park because who go to work. For instance, in the medical district, a lot of people that come in there in the morning, leave at 5 or 6 o'clock and really don't park in garages. And those parking, they're not decals, or those decals are not enforced. So we're looking at sort of an enforcement issue, and a lot of parking complaints come from a lot of homeowners who don't park in their driveways, who have 2 cars and a golf cart, and often try to park on the street. So I think what we have here is significantly an enforcement issue on parking. And in our proposed ordinance, we have strongly put some enforcement mechanisms where don't even think about getting a parking decal, you're not getting it. These type of units really cater to, from a demand point of view, for people that are not as auto-centric, although we have made spaces. It is definitely an enforcement issue for those particular neighborhoods. And I think Erica and Mr. Lawrence and Patrick may want to weigh in.
Can I ask the question?
Councilman Gregory.
Different way. 1 in 3, 100 units, 34 parking spaces. Okay, we're leased up. Got 100 units leased up. But we still have 100 people that have cars. Now, I understand the disincentive of if you don't have decal, okay, or parking permit someplace, it's going to be pretty expensive for you to park on the street because you're going to get ticketed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's nothing in the lease agreement, okay, that says once we reach the 34 units, okay, parking spaces available, okay, and the 35th person comes and wants to rent, but has a car, will that person be rented to? There's no restrictions in the lease that says you can't have a car in order to be housed in these units. Am I correct? Because I don't think we can do that.
Respectfully, the only restriction that would be in there is you're not getting a parking decal. And again, respectfully, from a market point of view, this type of product offering is not really centered to 100 people living there having 100 cars. It's just a guy who's 6'9" is not going to want a Toyota Corolla. He needs a bigger car. It's not marketed to that type of segment.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm dealing with possibilities.
And no, I understand that. It's a great question. Furthermore, from a development point of view, for the cost of building a building and $10 million an acre downtown, and $250 to $300 a square foot to build it with the BAR rules and 80-foot pilings, any sensible developer would never build it into market obsolescence because they would never rent it or they would never get a renewal. So these are sort of numbers that are even more liberal than other districts who are doing it, other cities like Austin and San Francisco and Washington. But I agree. I also think that the amount of parking for this type of unit located in the districts that these are promulgated for and who they appeal to is a sufficient amount from a time-tested market-based analysis in other similar cities. And it's even more restrictive, and especially with the idea of not having parking permits. And that is definitely in the lease.
Is there any safeguard, okay, that we can put in place that holds the developer responsible if you have, I don't know what, pick a number, 50, 60 folks in there that have cars, okay? Period, regardless of what the restrictions and all that stuff we have there. The fact that, they don't get a decal, it's gonna be much more expensive for them to park and even find a place, okay? I'm just trying to get to how, as a city, okay, we make sure that we don't exacerbate the limited parking we already have that's public, okay? But at the same time, if the developer or the owner exceeds X, okay, I don't know what we say would happen. They're greater minds than mine that can determine that. But to me, there needs to be something to make sure, that if you've got 80% of your occupants all having cars, what kind of effect is that going to have on the community as a whole?
It sounds like the vote is in-
Please speak into the mic so we can hear you.
It sounds like a legal question. And I think there's probably a way to figure that out. But again, it sounds more like a legal nuance. The point is any developer wouldn't want a project to fail. So I think from a leasing point of view, if a place had 100 units and 34 parking spots, it would be logical for the leasing office to say, don't even think about leasing here. If you have a car, you're not having a permit. But respectfully, but here's where it gets a little dicey, and there's probably a way to work through this and a nuance in dealing with the management of it. If you're in the medical district, medical residents have the use of the MUSC garage as a free parking spot. So if they have a car, they're parking in a free MUSC garage, even though they may not use it because they're working 18 hours a day doing that. So again, it's an interesting concept, but we wouldn't have built it into, any developer would not have built it into obsolescence. And we feel a lot of these districts, the parking issues are a function of enforcement and not caused by these type of buildings. And again, enforcement from people who are going there to work and parking on the street.
I'm sorry, I'm not worried about you.
One more second. I have Councilman Pell and Councilman Sackham. Sackham have a question. So let me get with Councilman Pell first and then followed by Councilman Sackham.
Thank you, Chairman Mitchell. And I'm sorry I'm not with y'all today. I'm overlooked the email that said it was going to be hybrid. So I'm sorry I'm hanging out on Zoom here, but just a couple thoughts to add to the discussion here. You know, we were talking a minute ago about looking at our zoning ordinance to find ways that our current regulations, not intentionally perhaps, but you know, nonetheless have an adverse effect on affordable housing. Minimum parking requirements are one of the biggest problems when it comes to delivering affordable housing through the private development you know, approach, right? So here we are, we have a developer that's trying to provide small units that can be priced at a point that's affordable. Not for everybody, but for certain people. Now, under current regulations, you've got to have a car associated with every unit or so, or whatever the requirements are. It's just impossible to do that on the peninsula when you factor in land prices, designing a site, all the different things that go into the equation. So what's being presented to us today is a way of peeling back some of that regulation so you can create a dynamic where a private developer can come forward and bring to market units where people can live priced at an affordable rate without a dollar from the city. No fee in lieu fund, no tax credits, none of this stuff, right? So I just wanted to flag that because we just discussed this about 2 or 3 agenda items ago, but this is a case in point of exactly what was mentioned a minute ago, where there are these features of common zoning practice which are extremely inimical to affordable housing and minimum parking requirements. We talked about this when we did away with minimum parking requirements on King Street last year to great success, I might add. These are not rules of nature that came from the heavens on tablets of stone. I mean, minimum parking requirements were put into place downtown in the 60s, right? There weren't minimum parking requirements for the first half century of the automobile, and the sky didn't fall, the sun didn't burn out. I mean, there's ways that this can work. And in terms of, what will happen if people bring their cars anyways? Well, there's a market for parking, whether it's offsite in a private garage. There's ways that the market can adapt to it. And I think this addresses Councilman Waring's point head on. If people park their cars where they shouldn't park, whether it's in a residential zone where they need a sticker and they can't get a sticker because of how we've set this whole thing up, then we should annihilate them through our parking enforcement, okay? Make it so onerous, boot them, tow them, fine them. I mean, let's just turn up the dial to a 10 so that you don't park where you're not allowed to, period. And, let's use that money that we generate to fund additional enforcement and just create an extremely aggressive parking enforcement regime, right? That's how we address people not doing what they're supposed to be doing. But we shouldn't, in the interest of, like, I don't want people parking in neighborhoods where they shouldn't be parking. But, the answer to that is not to put handcuffs on developers to prevent them from bringing to market units to solve our affordability crisis. It's to set the rules about where people can park, where they can't, and go after them hard if they break the rules. And so I think there's ways to address all these issues. If we need to maybe put an item on TNT to talk about ways we can toughen up and, let's put it this way. If you're renting a unit for $1,300, $1,500 a month, then you get a parking ticket for your month's rent, perhaps, if we're allowed to do that. I don't know. I'm not an expert in parking enforcement law. You can start seeing how the economic incentives of bringing a car and not doing what you're supposed to be doing can have a backwards, people operate based on incentives, and we have to just, set the system up right where people are incentivized to do the right thing and not do the wrong thing. So I think there's ways we can do this. This is an example of loosening our zoning restrictions to foster affordability through the private sector, which I think, to Councilman Waring's point from earlier, there's just absolutely no way we're getting 16,000 affordable units on the peninsula through fees and regulations and all these kind of things. It's just never going to happen. We have to find a way to expand the vision of how we make affordability happen. And this is one of the ways we do it. And I think that this is a great proposal. And I think, if we can tweak some of these parking rules to make sure that there's no negative externalities associated with this, I'm all for it. But that's the conversation we ought to be having, not on the zoning piece, but more on the enforcement side, which I think we can do.
Councilman Sackler?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry you got zapped off. A couple things. I would really encourage Councilman Waring and Gregory and Mitchell to go look at, if you haven't, 85 and 86 Line Street today. Erica's smiling. I think it's visually, you see what you can put into a small space. And I just will say, in terms of the parking, they do have a somewhat of a parking solution back there. It's not a silver bullet, but they have a parking carousel, believe it, in our city. These things you see in DC, you see them in New York, you see them in Atlanta. It's expensive, and there's probably a upfront cost. But that parks, Erica, you correct me if I'm wrong, that parks 15 to 20 vehicles vertically? 29 vehicles vertically. That's the perfect solution to park a maximum number of cars in a small space. There's a cost, but I've heard from several neighbors in West Side that are concerned about the parking, and I need to just voice those concerns. And I respectfully disagree, Mr. Roberts, regarding we can do everything we want to induce folks not to drive a car. Charleston is a car-centric city, unfortunately. Let's just be real. So I disagree that we're all of a sudden just going to wave a magic wand and people are going to sign leases that don't have vehicles. People are going to have vehicles. We need to figure out a system and a way to either incentivize them not to have vehicles or mitigate the fact that they will have vehicles, which is my point around the carousel. And to Councilman Appel's point, maybe we relax some of these standards, but just to assume all these folks are not going to have vehicles is going to, in my opinion, is going to do a disservice to the neighborhood.
Let me get to Councilman first, and then we can have all this.
Thank you. number one, I think we all are for this choice in housing. Okay. The good part about talking about a problem, it's like the birthing process. It's tough. When the baby comes out healthy and mother's healthy, everybody's overjoyed. I think we may have worked to a solution. Councilmember Appel spoke about rigorous parking enforcement. Mr. Roberts spoke of it as well. Could it be, I mean, we have our legal person over here. Could it be possible to include in the lease, once the parking maximum, has been reached, in this case of 134, have a warning for tenants that parking enforcement will be rigorously enforced. So when they come in there, it's no requirement on the developer, but it is a forewarning that they sign a lease with a warning in there saying that if you're going to be non-compliant in parking your car, you're going to be subject to rigorous enforcement. In this case, I guess by the city of Charleston. I mean, could something like that be done? It's not a requirement. It's just informing them before they move in of something that could happen.
I don't necessarily know if we could force the landlord to insert something like that. What you suggested makes a little more sense because it's not necessarily a requirement on the tenant to not have a car or else. It's just a warning or just educating the tenant that if you do bring a car, you will be subject to the parking enforcement provisions of the city. I think that's what I just heard you say.
That's right.
I think that's a fair ask. Whether or not we could force the landlord to actually put that in the lease terms, that's a different story and one that I can talk to Mr. Roberts about off the record for sure.
If we talk on the record about it, the intent of doing this microunit is exactly what Councilman Warren states. That I think this amendment
Please speak into the mic.
I think this amendment for mixed use citywide, that would go into the spirit and intent of the microunit. And I, as a developer and like-minded colleagues who would be so inclined to do this, would have no issue putting something in there. And as Councilman Appel says, turn the dial up to a 10. The intent here is not to parasitically choke city streets. Everything, we're big on disclosure, disclose everything. If you park here and if you are warned, if you park on the street, you're getting a level 10. I don't think any developer who is similarly minded who would do this creatively would have any issue disclosing that in the lease and having some type of amendment in that lease saying you cannot park on the city. If you do, you are going to be subject to these draconian fines and penalties and whatnot. I don't see that as an issue.
I think you can't with the keyword disclosing it, not requirement, but disclosing it.
And that we would have no issue seeing that as a tag along amendment to this zoning change. And we think it's actually a good idea in the spirit and intent of what we have proposed.
And you're a grade A developer. Now, Council Lady, back to the ordinance itself, to Councilman Gregory's point. This time somebody rode by and saw Mr. Roberts' project and in love with it. But then I come along and I want to do the same thing and I don't want to put that in my lease. How can we as a city, can we require disclosure?
You know, that's something we're going to have to look into. I don't know if we can make that a requirement of the ordinance or just a requirement of any kind of request, but we can certainly look into that. I mean, that's what we're trying to avoid is having people clog the streets using this incentive. So we can look into it for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Can I add to that though? When we put the disclosure, okay, it would be great if we can give some suggestions on where there may be available garages or spaces that they could use as an alternative. I think then it's full circle. We're not just telling you that you can't and we will enforce, okay? But we're also saying, here, there are a couple of spaces over wherever that you may be able to get, okay? I think if we put that as a piece of it, then I think the circle is
Lawrence, I'll give you 2 minutes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Arthur Lawrence, and I have boots on the ground for years. And we support this micro unit. But we are in a unique situation. We have to be careful when we put all the restriction on the developers, but no restriction on those other people that are in business who's buying up all these homes in the medical district and renting it out, each bedroom and everyone, like a house on the other side of my house, have 5 cars and the cars do not move. That's a problem because all these individuals work at the medical district, so they don't need their car. So if we're gonna put the restriction solely on developers, we need to look at all those individuals who are buying family homes and turn it into rental property and bringing all these cars too. So the neighborhood voted on this years ago when it came forth to our community. And believe me, when I say I have boots on the ground, I watch what's happening in the medical district. And this will be a fantastic opportunity for people to live there, walk there, and the developer dot the I and cross the T because they follow all the ideas and recommendations that was in the city plan, practically to the T. So be careful. You don't create a one-sided situation and the problems that still exist with people buying home and enforcement. Enforcement in this community is very important and is not happening to alleviate the parking problem from the medical district.
Lawrence. Anybody else have any?
Move for approval as discussed.
If I get a second?
Appel?
Oh, second.
Mr. Chairman,
Councilmember
Councilmember Saccharin has his hand up.
Okay, let's carry the motion and then we ask for the question.
Okay, it's moved in properly.
Moving proper second, all in favor, vote by saying aye.
discussion.
No. The discussion, Councilman Saccharin.
I know you all want to get done. My question is for Mr. Roberts. If you could just briefly talk about, why the concept of a carousel would work, wouldn't work financially, the space too small, too big. Can you just address that? Because I do think that's a legitimate solution to address part of the parking problem.
Thank you for giving me your time. And I'm not answering the question for Mr. Roberts, but I do want to just kind of explain the carousel piece is that this ordinance didn't exist at the time. And so we had to comply with the current regulations. Now, would we have had to make that significant investment? Not necessarily, because we had to find a solution to a problem, which was there was no option to do as much density on that site on a per acre using an MU. Now, when you look at the entire map of properties that are zoned MU, there are not a lot of those properties that are going to fit into this type of matrix of this ordinance. There's only very few that are going to be within a quarter of a mile of a grocery store and near a job center. It's very small number of opportunities. And a lot of those sites that are zoned MU are already have plans of development on them that currently exist. So the other thing I want to kind of say about the parking, the reason why ours works is because we made the investment knowing that there was be a fine balance between providing affordable and doing our market rate. But also the issue about the question about the one-to-one parking, about 100 people being on the site, is that there's a presumption that people are not shrewd enough to be able to figure out how to navigate the peninsula without a vehicle. And I do believe people who rent a product like this are being shrewd. They're being tactical about their finances. They're being tactical about why they want to live in a particular location. And they will figure out how to operate without having a vehicle. So the concept that there's 100%, that every occupant in that building will have a vehicle, I think makes the presumption that it can't function, that someone cannot function without a vehicle if they're within this kind of a 1 mile radius of everything that they need to have. But Mr. Robert, I'm gonna let you answer that particular question.
To narrowly give you the question, the carousel is just a unique site-specific thing that Whitney Powers designed for that site with Erica and Bob Holt. And there are other considerations on Erica's site that make it more suitable for some unusual device like that. The most efficient way to create density and keep the price down is, because it's very expensive to build things in the city, is really, we are going to, any plan that we construct in a mixed use district on a site that's a third to a half an acre would be in a garage parking and a structured parking element, which would be the most efficient and architecturally congruous way to do it, where you're building a building, you have a commercial activated storefront and a street front, because these are all at city centers and the buildings have to architecturally be congruous. And that particular device that Erica had uniquely, it works for that particular site before this was invented. And to create that particular device is actually inefficient to build what we need to build, especially on sites that are in commercial corridors on arterial roadways. So that's really how I see it, but it was a good question. And, you know, from the point of view of parking, a unit is defined as 4 bedrooms. So if something was created, you know, on a site that one of the many sites that we would have planned to do something like this in an MU district, we had a previous plan prior to the city comprehensive plan that came out with 119 bedrooms with individual bathrooms, but it was classified as 30 units. So we would have had close to 120 residents with only 30 parking spots. And because the comprehensive plan came out and we were so enamored with it and said, we can create this, actually it parks more cars with individual price approachable apartments for that missing middle. But it was a good question, and architecturally, these buildings need to be built with structured parking, and the carousel is not nearly an efficient way to park as many cars.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Roberts.
Thank you.
Just a quick,
Okay,
I just want to make sure that for the record, and I've already had a discussion with Mr. Roberts on this. This is not a new concept. The Housing Authority has been doing this for years. Units 275, 300, 350 square feet. And I'm not sure what the parking requirements are there, but I know most of those residents, a lot of those residents don't have car. And the last thing I want to say is when we talk about parking and traffic in the central city, we've got to remember that we're only 8 square miles. That's all. We can't compare ourselves, okay, with respect, going back to Councilman Appel, we can't compare ourselves with some of the largest cities, okay, that we've been talking about, okay? Totally different. Charleston is a totally different animal. Our central city is only 8 square miles. And I just want to make sure the record reflects that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
okay, we have the motion on the floor. All in favor, vote by saying.
Restate the motion, please.
Oh, the motion, my motion was that we approve the ordinance as written with the caveats that we talked about with respect to parking.
Parking disclosure.
Right, parking disclosure, as well as identifying, okay? Parking spaces that might be available once you have reached your 1/3 capacity. That's the motion.
Okay.
Now you're ready for the motion?
Yes.
All in favor, vote by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, is nay. I have it. On to the last
Oh, Lord.
piece on the agenda. This is Councilman Gregory. So I turn it over to you, Mr. Gregory.
Okay. I hope.
Thank you all for coming.
I hope the members of the committee has done their homework and reviewed the proposed fair housing law, proposed draft law. And I think it's very important for us to clearly understand that when we talk fair housing, okay, we're talking fair housing for everyone, because everyone in this room is protected under the Fair Housing Act. Every single person in this room is protected under the Fair Housing Act. And I'm saying that to make sure that my colleagues clearly realize that when we talk fair housing, it is not race-based, okay? It has protected classes, sexual orientation, race, religion, color. What are some of the others? Familial status, persons with disabilities. All of us fit under one of those categories and will at some point. So when we talk fair housing, I just want everybody to be clear that we're talking about protections for all Charlestonians. First point. The second point is, what this does is get us out of the performative stage. And I call passing the ordinance on human affairs and racial conciliation more performative. I find this piece to be more action-oriented. And one may say, well, this doesn't have anything to do with the ordinance that we passed. Well, it does. Because if you read the ordinance clearly talk about HARC looking at the non-discrimination requirements that are applicable to the city of Charleston. So there is a linkage. The second thing is that I'd like to do is explain how this process works, okay? The city of Charleston is applying to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development to find their draft fair housing ordinance to be substantially equivalent to the national ordinance. The city of Charleston's existing ordinance, in some cases, have been ahead of the federal law because we had classes that are protected that weren't a part of the national law. We were protecting sexual orientation before the Fair Housing Act was amended to do so. So it's important for us to know that if we send this forward to the Secretary of HUD, they will review to see whether or not on its face, that it meets the requirements for in order for it to be a substantially equivalent law to the federal law. Some may argue that the infrastructure is not in place for us to take this on. And I would argue just the opposite. The city of Charleston has been working with the Charleston Urban League for years to do marketing and outreach. And more recently, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development gave our Urban League a FIP grant, which is the Fair Housing Initiatives Program grant, in the amount of $250,000. What are they going to do with it? Well, they're going to do marketing and outreach to make people realize the protections that they have under the fair housing laws. Once they do this marketing campaign, the level of complaints hopefully may increase in our area substantially. At least we hope that it will be. This rule would then give the city of Charleston the opportunity to have some enforcement behind its current law. How do we pay for it? We pay for this through the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Back to the infrastructure. We will have 3 years from the time this is agreed to on its face by HUD to get the infrastructure in place. They will pay for capacity building. They will pay for technical assistance. They'll pay for processing of any complaints, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is not to say, however, that there may be some resources that the city may have to commit to. But I'm saying all this to say is that I strongly recommend, and we've been working on this for a number of years, and Councilman Appel, I think it was you that say that, you know, the legislative body does not submit any legislation. I'm submitting legislation, Councilman Saccharin, okay? That's not coming from the administration, but it's coming from me, okay? So we do have the ability to do that as long as we work very closely with our legal department. In addition to the legal department comparing our draft with the federal requirements, I've done that as well. And there's only one line in there that we've got to take out. And that's the line dealing with gifts. Okay, there's something in there about gifts that doesn't belong in there. Okay, the second thing is that where we have HARC, let's put Human Affairs Commission. Okay, so I'm asking, and I hope that everybody did their homework, that everybody read this rule, so that we don't have to go through deferment. All I'm asking is for us to move this forward to the body of a whole for consideration to be submitted to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for review, which in and of itself will take time. Some of you will argue we don't even have a director, okay, of the HARC yet. Well, hopefully within 3 years we will. And it would be a good time, I think, a fresh start, I think, with a new director to take this on, in addition to the other responsibilities of the HARC. So I don't know if you had an opportunity to see, again, going back to, and I like to talk to Councilman Appel. When we talk about the Fair Housing Act, we're talking about an intersectional law that affects just about everything that we do, from mortgage lending to affordable housing to zoning and land use planning, of which we already have as a part of our city plan and approved by council. All this is going to do, I think, is give the city the kind of enforcement authority to make the Fair Housing Act real. Yes, we have one on the books now, but the highest penalty, I think, is $1,000 or something like that. That's it. I mean, people who have violated the Fair Housing Act or Title VI have been held responsible in some cases for $26 million in damages. And I think of the Walker case in East Texas, and there are a number of other cases. So council members, you know, I'm hoping that you did your homework and you read the Fair Housing draft, and that we can move this on to the body as a whole with those adjustments that I just articulated, like changing where we have HARC to Human Affairs. And again, I guess you want to know, well, who's going to do all this work? You subcontract it out, folks. Okay, our legal department, okay, does not have the capacity to do all of what it would be required if this law becomes substantially equivalent. So we will partner with the Urban League. okay, who has been our champions of enforcing not only the Fair Housing Act, but the affirmative obligations as well, to do most of the hard lifting when it comes to the enforcement component of this draft. So I'm strongly recommending that as we celebrate Fair Housing Month this month, that we show finally that the city is continuing to make sure that there's equity, inclusion, and equal opportunity in all that the Fair Housing Act applies to.
We have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Appel had his hand up.
I'm gonna move for approval and we can discuss it further in the body of the motion.
Second.
Okay, we move in second. We have the discussion. Council.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, you know, I fully support us having a fair housing ordinance. I fully support us having a robust enforcement mechanism, because I agree with Councilman Gregory. If you have an ordinance on the book and you're not enforcing it, that is performance. That's not being real about it. I mean, look at what we do with short-term rentals, for goodness sake. I mean, you run a unlawful Airbnb in Cannonboro, Elliotboro, you're getting popped by the city of Charleston, okay? And if we're a city that's enforcing short-term rentals more aggressively than we are discrimination on the basis of race, sexual orientation, et cetera, that's not a good place to be. I think we can enforce all of our ordinances. If we're gonna have an ordinance on the book, we ought to enforce it. I'm not opposed to the HARC having a role in reviewing what we're doing and providing feedback and input and you know, things of that nature. But I do think, as the ordinance is drafted, and I'm happy to hear that Councilman Gregory is open to a modification here. I do have an issue with a citizen appointed board having enforcement powers to this degree, issuing subpoenas, holding administrative hearings, initiating lawsuits, things of that nature. You know, we don't let the Citizens Police Advisory Council go and arrest people and carry guns and things like that. You know, citizens commissions have a very important role in this city, but they're there to review and provide input and be a resource for us. So as long as we can vest the enforcement powers in a city entity that's professionalized and made up of attorneys and professionals that we hire to do this enforcement work, I'm all for it. If we can get the federal government to pay for it, I'm double supportive of it. So I just think that I want to applaud Councilman Gregory for bringing this forward. I think that this is what legislating looks like. And, let's just make sure that the enforcement provisions are appropriate here. And I think we'll be in a good position. So I appreciate y'all hearing me out on that.
Councilman Appel, and I appreciate what you just said, but the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development will make sure, okay, that what you just described is not happening.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Councilmember Saccharin has his hand up.
Councilman Saccharin?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Councilman Gregory, can you just explain? Obviously, you all know, you personally know where I stand on this, and I'll echo Ross's comments. I guess my question is, to what extent does HARC have the ability to execute or initiate some of these things that are outlined in the ordinance?
If our law is found substantially equivalent to the federal law, and this is under our Human Affairs /HARC Commission, then that commission would then have the responsibility of finding and identifying the kind of expertise to make things happen. under no circumstances am I saying that we are not going to be working with Corporation Counsel on this. I mean, it's a no-brainer, we would have to. But when it comes to investigations, when it comes to complaints, when it comes to making sure that those complaints have standing or whether or not those complaints can be closed administratively, all of that will be done at a subcontracting level through hopefully the Urban League. I've already had some discussions with Otha Meadows, who is the executive director of the Urban League. And in our conversations, he clearly said that HUD would look very well upon them if not only do they have the FIP, but now have the FAP with the enforcement responsibilities. So in answer to your question, Council Member Saccharin, yes, there will be a role for the Human Affairs Commission / HARC, but that role would be clearly coordinated with our legal department and our partners on the outside for implementation.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, can Councilmember Waring just repeat the motion, just so that I have it correct for the record?
Just move for approval.
Okay, so no amendments.
As amended.
As amended.
Okay,
Okay.
it was approved as amended.
Right. Well, I mean,
But I'm
that's
gonna
the
make
motion, that's the motion.
The motion, okay, I'm gonna have a little something to say. So far as the fair housing is concerned, a lot of my colleagues might not be so familiar with the Fair Housing Act, so to speak. But the Fair Housing Act, I worked in that Fair Housing Act for almost 30 years, doing the fair housing for the total 3 counties, Berkeley, Dorchester, Charleston County, and Myrtle Beach, Hilton Head, Beaufort, and Walter Bar. I did it all under fair housing when I was working as a HUD certified housing counselor. Councilman Gregory worked in Washington, DC under the fair housing, a lot of people don't know about it, and dealt with the $1 billion up in fair housing in Washington, DC. And a lot of my time and had to report to him, although he came after I was, but then I was here as a local person. So when you come to fair housing, he was big on fair housing before he came down to Columbia and became the manager of the HUD office in Columbia for 8 years. Some people didn't even know that. He ran that and dealt with more money than the city of Charleston deal with right now today. So fair housing is something that I was very involved in, even doing sometimes adjudication, because with HUD, they give me that authority to do some of that. And if it was on the outside, we had the Human Affairs Commission when a person was outside of HUD factor. So this is something very important that we really need to get into if we are thinking about all this type of things with fair housing. So.
Microphone.
The responsibility to carry out the non-discrimination requirements within HUD's programs, including fair housing, lies in our Office of Community Planning and Development, okay? The whole affirmatively furthering obligation lies in that office. So in addition to working with Corporation Counsel, we would also have to work with the program area, which is responsible to make sure that when the city certifies to the non-discrimination requirements, that is in fact carried out, and not just the Fair Housing Act, Title VI, Section 3, and I can go on and on. So, and again, this is back to Councilman Appel and Councilman Saccharin. It's not something that can be worked on in isolation, and it will be coordinated through Corporation Counsel and of course, the Office of Housing and Community Development.
There's no other questions. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye. You better do a roll call.
Yeah, can we get a roll call, because I haven't,
I just had a quick question. Is the motion to move forward to full council with the ordinance as amended, specifically by removing HARC from the enforcement provisions? I just want to be clear about that.
To instead of using the acronym HARC, we're going to use Human Affairs Commission. And the other amendment is to remove a provision that had to do with the HARC being able to accept gifts. Okay, so we're removing that.
Okay, got it. So does the Human Affairs Commission exist in the city of Charleston, or is that going to be established?
The HARC is the Human Affairs Commission for the city of Charleston, Human Affairs and Racial Conciliation.
All right, so now I'm real confused. I mean, here's the bottom line. I want to be very clear, because I feel like we're not being clear here. There is no citizen appointed board that's going to have subpoena powers.
Not being enforced
in the city under my watch.
It will not be. It's not going to be.
It's illegal.
By a private.
So I don't appreciate saying we're taking HARC out, but we're adding the Human Affairs Commission, but the Human Affairs Commission is HARC. That's silly games. Let's be honest and real right now, before this is another blow up at full council. Okay?
I'm with you.
All right, let's be serious here.
We're in the same place.
Okay, that's silliness. I'm just gonna call it straight. Don't say you're taking out HARC, but we're creating a Human Affairs Commission, but the Human Affairs Commission is HARC. That's silliness.
Maybe I can try to clarify this. If I understand the process, Councilman Gregory, if we adopt this ordinance as amended, it would then go to HUD for review. That'll take about, as you say, 2 to 3 years for them to certify that our ordinance complies with the federal fair housing statute. During that time, we could create a Human Affairs Commission. We could establish a Human Affairs Office. So I mean, we've got time to get to that issue, I think, if I hear you correctly.
Yeah, for transparency purposes, and I think that Councilmember Appel is spot on. Call it what it is, and it is HARC. And HARC has a human affairs function. So call it what it is. I'm where you are. You don't have to agree with that amendment. And the reason that, can we talk offline regarding this issue? But I'm willing to take that amendment off and leave it as HARC.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question? I guess both my colleagues. I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, Councilman Appel, your issue is private citizens having enforcement.
Yes.
They don't.
That's your main issue. I'm asking.
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, I
get it. No, Councilman Gregory, can you answer that?
I thought I did. I mean, like all commissions, okay. You are tied to, quote unquote, a professional body that it's experienced in subpoenas, okay, and all those things. Those wouldn't be coming from the commission, and you can't even get to that without determining whether or not the complaint has standing. And in order to determine whether or not the complaint has standing, and whether or not it's something that may in fact violate the fair housing law, that process is not something that citizens make a determination. That's based on law. That's based on us being able to subcontract with an entity that is experienced in this area. Because if you read the fair housing law, federal law, you will see that the kinds of requirements in order to get from point A to point B is just not a little citizen advisory group saying, hey, let's do a subpoena. No, you have to determine, first of all, before you even get there, okay, whether or not the complainant, okay, has standing. If it doesn't have standing, then it'll be closed administratively. But that's not decided by the citizenry. That's decided by the operation that we put in place to do the screening and to make the determination. And that will be done by people who are professionals in this area. Under no circumstances do I want you to believe that HUD would make a law substantially equivalent to the federal law that would allow citizens to subpoena. I mean, a lot of these things will have to go through the courts to make decisions and remedies, et cetera. They won't be made by the citizenry. Can't be. It has to follow the federal law. And that's why we want to partner with an organization such as the Urban League, who has that background and experience. And just for a point of clarification, if HUD says that our law on its face is substantially equivalent, yes, we have 3 years through capacity building and technical assistance to put all this together. It's not just going to happen tomorrow, if that's the fair. And that, you know, people like neighborhood presidents or whoever are going to be making the decisions as to whether or not we're going to subpoena somebody. I don't think so. That's not the way this works. If that's your fair.
Councilmember and Saccharin too.
Councilman Pell, and then followed by Councilman Saccharin.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm looking at section 8 of the proposed new ordinance, subsection A. This is what it says. It says, in conducting an investigation, the HARC shall have access at all reasonable times to premises, records, documents, individuals, and other evidence or possible sources of evidence, and may examine, record, and copy the materials and take the record and testimony or statements of persons who are reasonably necessary for the furtherance of the investigation, provided the HARC first complies with the provisions of the state constitution relating to unreasonable searches and seizures. The HARC may issue subpoenas to compel its access. That's what it says. Again, I want to be very clear about this. I'm not anti-fair housing. I'm not anti-enforcement. The HARC is a citizens commission by regular people like the Women's Commission, the Commission on Bike and Pedestrians. That's the ordinance we pass. You cannot give a citizens group subpoena powers to go on to somebody's property and get documents and stuff. Like, I'm just telling y'all, there is no way that's legal. And I'm just concerned we're going to create a very unfortunate situation at full council if this is not substantially remedied. Again, let's establish a department of the city like we do with short-term rentals, like we do with other types of enforcement issues, and let's professionalize it and let's fund it. The HARC can review what's going on and make recommendations and things of that nature all day. But don't tell me the HARC's going to be having subpoena power and the ability to initiate hearings and to file lawsuits and to contract with people. That's what this ordinance is presented says. And I just am warning, this is going to not go over well with the community and the public. I want this to succeed. This is not the right way to go about the enforcement mechanism. Again, it just comes down to, we can't have citizens groups enforcing municipal ordinances. It just, that's not going to go over well.
Well, I guess maybe I'm not clear, because I think that anything that any of the commissions do, including the Women's Commission, and it has any legal ramifications, it has to go to the legal department. This commission would not be any different at all. And I think you have to also understand that this is complaint driven. Okay? Absent a complaint, there's nothing to review. But if a complaint, let's say the complaint comes to the HARC, okay, where would that go? Okay, I mean, the first place if something comes to the HARC, that would go to whatever subgroup, whatever partner we have that has the kind of investigative skills to take a look at the complaint. Just remember, this is complaint driven. Okay, to look at that complaint through the eyes of professional people who understands the law and make a determination as to, on its face, there may be a violation of the law. Now, if there is a violation of the law, okay, that's when everything else kicks in terms of investigations, because you're going to have to investigate it. Somebody's going to have to investigate, determine whether or not the complaint has any legitimacy. Now, if you're suggesting that this be placed somewhere else other than HARC, what's your suggestion? Our legal department?
I mean, I think that our ordinances should be enforced, in a universal standard way across the board. I mean, it's our legal department, is my understanding, that enforces our ordinances. We have different sort of divisions. I mean, don't we have an attorney that just prosecutes short-term rental violations under our STR regulations? I mean, I'm not opposed to enforcement. I'm just saying we can't let a citizens appointed group do this. It's just not, there's just no way that's legal. Put aside whether it's good policy. I don't think it's good policy. I don't think it's legal. You cannot give a group of people we just select executive powers like this and judicial powers like this. I mean, under this ordinance, the HARC is getting executive powers, legislative powers, and judicial powers. And they have the authority to contract under section 16-24-019. I mean, this would make the HARC one of the most powerful entities in the city. Arguably more powerful than council. We don't have judicial powers. We don't have executive powers. I mean, this is an enormous amount of authority that's being granted to a entity that, as my understanding is an entity that's designed to review policies by the city and provide us with recommendations, which is fine.
But I think we can short circuit this if that's problematic. I think that it could go to our legal department in conjunction with the Office of Community Development. And it may be that our legal department we may have to allocate dollars to our legal department to have someone specifically for this issue. Let's make it simple. I'm with you. I mean, if I don't know how to quite structure that, but I think we can just change the language accordingly.
Councilman Sycamore have his hand up, and we're gonna do this, but I think we might have to end this discussion for a while.
Thank you, Chair.
It's one meeting already.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to understand the delta between Ross and Councilman Gregory's proposal. I'm going to vote to pass this, to move this forward, but I do have concerns just around the language. And if it needs to be more clearly articulated about what HARC's role is, which I'm obviously supportive of, let's do that. It sounds like Councilman Gregory's willing to move that to another part of the city, whether it's our general counsel or another department. I just don't want folks to be confused if this comes to full council about what's being presented. That's my concern. but I'm willing to move it forward, vote for it, yes, so we can talk about it in full council, but just want to make sure we're clear about what we're asking other fellow council members to vote on.
I agree with that.
Mr. Chairman.
Greg, Waring?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with all that's been said. Councilmember Appel, again, sounds like we're pretty close to a solution here. You've read that provision pretty finely tuned, and I appreciate your work. What suggestion would you have where to move that subpoena power, investigative power, et cetera? Sounds like Councilmember Gregory thinks the legal department is the right department. What about you?
You know, I personally think that this may need another scrub by legal to make sure that the right authorities are put in the right places. I mean, typically a municipal attorney doesn't have subpoena powers. Subpoenas are issued typically through the court, right? So like if I file a lawsuit in civil court and I want to issue a subpoena, I sign the subpoena. The subpoena is issued through the court, right? So it's really a tribunal, whether it's judicial or administrative, that has subpoena powers. So I think that in terms of bringing the case, it seems to me like having an attorney for the city do that is appropriate. If we establish sort of an administrative complaint review and adjudication process, that body can have subpoena powers potentially. So what I mean by like an administrative body, it would be something akin to like the administrative law courts that we have in South Carolina, but it would need to be like a neutral, judge or somebody that rules on this. It can't be, with the kind of teeth that we're talking about here, you can't place that in the hands of, just like regular citizens, like we see with the BZA or the Planning Commission or something along those lines. They don't have the kind of teeth of that magnitude. But I would suggest, we've got years to do this based on what I'm hearing. I think before an ordinance gets to full council, I think it would be helpful to have a scrub of this to make sure that we have a legitimate enforcement mechanism while being very clear about the various roles in here, because I'm concerned about the way the ordinance is drafted right now and how it could be seized upon potentially. So that would be my request.
The council member, I think you have a common ground on your concern. I mean, this is where the sausage gets made in committee. So we don't have to do this on the floor. Given your concern, what would be the right place to deposit, if you will, when complaints and has to be followed up upon? It's not going to be the committee. If not the legal department, where?
Well, I mean, I think that, let's analogize it to other types of ordinance violations. I mean, if somebody, is operating an illegal short-term rental in Burns Downs and I get a complaint about it, that goes to our, livability/legal department for further action, and maybe code enforcement. I think that following that sort of track where complaints are maybe received at the staff level, but sent to our legal department, maybe even a legal staff person who's tasked with just doing this to bring an action. Now, where that action goes, whether that's something that's adjudicated at the administrative level with the city, or if that's something that goes straight to court, I don't know enough about this area of the law to say what's appropriate. My only concern is we just can't have a citizens appointed group having any judicial powers or executive powers in terms of bringing cases and enforcing the law. I just think that's problematic. So I hope I'm being helpful here. I think that the more we can bring this in line with the way that we currently enforce ordinances, I think the better we'll be, both from a legal perspective and from a buy-in perspective with the rest of our colleagues.
Yeah, just as a response, I don't know how much scrubbing you can do other than changing the names in order for this to be substantially equivalent to the national law. What our legal department has done here in developing this, it mirrors the federal requirements. So the only scrubbing that I can see us doing to make you a bit more comfortable is to place it under our legal department. And this commission is a little different from the other ones that you articulated. This commission has a paid staff person by the city that is responsible for this. It's not like the examples that you just raised. There is no specific city staff being paid for by the city assigned to those commissions. This one's different. So you do have the linkage directly in the mayor's office because that staff person reports to the mayor. So just so that we're both on the same page, the HARC is a little different from some of the other commissions that we had. But I think that to settle your concern, to me, the only way we can settle your concern is to change HARC to something else. Because anything else you want to scrub would make it not substantially equivalent to the federal law, and therefore it won't be approved. So the only thing we're talking about here is the name or the placement of the function. I think. Because all that you just read in Section 8 mimics the federal national law. So where are we?
Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Saccharin has his hand up.
All right, Chair. I'll be quick, 10 seconds.
Okay.
I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think HARC has a place in this ordinance. I just think we need to be very clear about some of the language. I'm not an attorney, but when I do see subpoena and some of this language, it does give me pause for concern. So I want to keep HARC having a central place in this, but being clear about some of these points where we're talking about subpoena power, gathering evidence, and to me, I'm not sure that's the role of HARC. And maybe that falls on counsel, general counsel, but I think Ross made a good point earlier. Maybe HARC's role is to review some of these issues and to provide recommendations, but getting into some of the legalese, I feel like we are going to open up a can of worms that's going to cause concern for other council members.
Basically, is making the recommendations to the appropriate place. That's all. They're not going to investigate complaints and serve subpoenas. They don't have the authority to do that. So I don't know whether or not we're making this a little more difficult than it has to be.
There may be clarifying language in how our Human Affairs Commission is established at the state level. I don't know because I haven't looked at that might help bring clarity and a conclusion that we're looking for to this. Naturally, the goal was to have this represented to full council, but I just offer that because the Human Affairs Commission in Columbia has been operating in their capacity for some time. So it might be helpful for us to look at that. And I don't know, Julia, if Sterling and Amber use that, but we love best practices. And so if that's something we can look at to get this to the next level, I think it would be appropriate. Thank you.
Just to dovetail on what she said, the language that we're talking about in our ordinance right now mirrors the state law, and the State Human Affairs Commission is appointed by the governor.
Thank you. I was about to say that. Just as I'm just not sure whether or not we are where we need to be in terms of understanding. Okay, and I think that's what it is, how this really works. Yes, I have met with the Human Affairs Commission at the state level. Amber and I have met with her on more than one occasion to discuss the kinds of things that they're doing that we can emulate. And I think more specific, I think it's their community outreach piece. And if you read their community outreach piece, it mirrors many of the recommendations that came from the special commission. Restorative practices in schools. I mean, most of the recommendations that we have made through the special commissions are consistent with those that are already being implemented in some cases and in partnership with us already. So the language that any language changes that you're talking about other than who will be administering this thing, I think if we do anything different than that, it's going to die at the federal level because it won't mirror the federal law. So to me, the only thing we're discussing is where you want to place it. Come on.
Question, one more. Who, council lady, who enforces the federal law in the city of Charleston when it comes? Getting your exercise.
I am getting my steps in, thank you. So under our current fair housing ordinance, the city can file in circuit court for an injunction to stop any inappropriate behavior, or we can issue a ticket for a misdemeanor under our current code. And so I would assume the legal department would be doing that if that is the case.
Appel, I just think that you're misunderstanding what we're really attempting to do here. I really do.
Rick's getting exercise.
I think the confusion is when you adopted the HARC ordinance, you had certain requirements for the HARC and certain responsibilities and certain restrictions on what they could do. This new ordinance seems to expand those. And I think that's where the conflict is. And I think people
think that we need to be very careful on what we vote on, because if you go back to the ordinance that created the HARC, it is very clear that the HARC will be looking at the non-discrimination requirements. And this is a non-discrimination requirement. Speaking of writing legislation and understanding it, there was a purpose to put that piece in the HARC ordinance because of this very issue. But you're not going, and HARC will be doing much more than this, by the way. I mean, this is just one aspect, but I see HARC more as administrative and coordinating with our legal department and our community planning and development department on issues of fair housing, affirmatively furthering fair housing, because they don't have the kind of power that you're talking about. So yes, if we change that to the appropriate city legal program department, would that work for you? Councilman Appel?
You know, I need to see the way it's drawn up to understand what we're doing here. Again, I'm not opposed to enforcement mechanisms under our authority, but I think we got to be very careful about how we are communicating about HARC, which, by the way, hasn't even been formed. I mean, we approved this thing after so much, back and forth. It hasn't done its first thing, and now we're talking about giving it subpoena power. I mean, I think really HARC should be one sentence in this ordinance, that they have the opportunity to review our ordinances and our practices and policies and make recommendations to us. But HARC should be nowhere near any enforcement action, any investigation, any subpoena, any administrative hearing, any lawsuit. I'm telling y'all, there is nowhere close to 7 votes for this. And the community is going to go crazy if this lands on a city council agenda. I mean, do y'all remember that I sort of had a similar line of warning about this process last summer and nobody listened to me? and we saw what happened. I am pleading with y'all to be mindful of what you're doing here and what signals this is sending to the community, the whole community. This is a warning. I'm warning everybody here about what's going to happen.
I'm not sure what you're warning us of, okay?
I'm warning you about HARC being dissolved.
Okay.
Okay, that's what I'm warning you about.
Well, okay, and if HARC is dissolved with 7 votes, HARC will be
Yes.
dissolved with 7 votes, okay? But the question, that's not the question that we're dealing with here right now, okay? The language that you have before you, mirrors the federal law. It seems to me the only issue that you have right now is the fact that HARC is there. I'm just suggesting let's take that out and move forward. But I think you have problems with not just HARC, but the fact that whoever this entity is will have these powers, be it our legal department, be it community planning and development, the urban league, whoever. I think. So all I'm saying is before we get this to the body of a whole, let's just amend it, take all references to HARC out of it, and put our legal department there. Can I amend? Yeah.
I'll amend my motion to say that. I accept the amendment from Councilmember Gregory. And I actually think, hey, I know you're getting tired, Mr. Chairman, we all are, but frankly, I think this exercise has been worthwhile. Okay? So I accept the amendment.
Mr.
What's the amendment?
Wherever HARC is in the ordinance, place the legal department and the appropriate program office.
With the city of Charleston.
With the city of Charleston. Corporation Council.
And what, are we also removing section 6.7, the acceptance of gifts and
Yes,
grants? Okay.
yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, everyone understand that? Yes or no?
Council members Appel and Saccharin.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the motion.
Roll call.
Okay, I'm gonna call for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Yes.
Councilmember Gregory,
Yes.
Councilmember Waring,
Yes.
Councilmember Appel,
No.
Councilmember Saccharin.
Yes.
Okay.
motion carries.
The motion carries. So we'll move this on to full council.
Now, I'm doing to make sure, Councilman Appel, we've been here before, Councilman Member Appel, okay? We're making this change. That's only change, okay, based upon your concern, okay? And HARC does not need to be mentioned in this discussion when this goes before the body of a whole, just so that we're clear, okay?
That sounds good. I just want to see a copy of the ordinance as it's drafted. I mean, we spent a year working on our ADU ordinance. I mean, we can just wordsmith it.
We've spent 10 years on this one.
Okay.
10 years on this one, Councilmember Councilmember Appel. 10 years.
So we'll have the clerk, if you can, with the new ordinance,
Yes.
just send it out to everyone
Yes.
prior to council if you can.
Yes, sir.
Next
I
council meeting prior to.
I just spoke to Julie and we're going to try to send that out to everybody tomorrow and have it posted for the public.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
If nothing else comes before, let me check to make sure.
Move for adjournment.
Move for adjournment.